I'm starting a channel today, which I am calling Living Immunocompromised, Calculated Risks. The purpose of the channel is to try and provide the immunocompromised tips and strategies for dealing with this new world we found ourselves in. As a point of reference, today is April 19th, 2022. I should say a few words about myself, about why I'm doing this and why I'm doing it now. First and foremost, I'm immunocompromised. And when COVID arrived on the scene at the end of February 2020, my life was turned upside down. In the last 26 months, virtually every decision I've made of any consequence has been influenced by it. And as such, I've developed a kind of visceral understanding of the challenges imposed, not appreciated by society at large, or even the medical community, or really even immunologists, frankly. It's one of those things that you have to live in order to get. As to why I'm doing this, well, I'm retired. I have a lot of time on my hands, and I've had a hard time thinking of things that I can do that feel productive or useful to anyone besides myself. And part of that is because I'm immunocompromised. I have to really limit my exposure to other people. So this is one of the few things that I can think of to do that might actually be helpful to someone besides myself. As to why I'm doing this now, the answer to that question is a little more complicated. You see, when COVID first arrived, my thinking was that, yes, there could be multiple waves and surges, but it would eventually go away. It would disappear, kind of like the Spanish flu. And it's become increasingly clear that the Spanish flu is not a good model for COVID. A better model, I think, is the common cold, which, not incidentally, is also a coronavirus. And the common cold is never going away. It's endemic. As far as I can tell, the only practical difference between the cold and COVID is much more virulent. But it may not have started out that way. We don't really know when the cold first arrived. It may have been hundreds of years ago, or even thousands. And it may have been that when the cold first appeared, it was much more lethal than it is now. It could have been more lethal than COVID. Instead of 1 in 100 people dying, it could have been 1 in 10. But over the course of generations, our immune systems adapted to it. But that's all kind of academic if you're immunocompromised. The future is looking like one variant after another indefinitely, each with a slightly different profile. From where I sit, it doesn't really matter if one variant is slightly less virulent than the last. I assume that they're all mortal threats, at least until I see evidence to the contrary. The characteristic I'm most interested in is how contagious the variants are. And on that front, things aren't looking so good. Each variant appears to be more contagious than the last. I realize this could sound a little alarmist, So I should say here that I understand that the state of being immunocompromised can take many different forms. Here's my first tip. If you're immunocompromised, I would get vaccinated and boosted, and then I would run a test called an anti-S antibody test. The S here stands for spike protein. And what this test measures is whether or not your immune system had a response to the vaccine. In my case, it did not. In your case, it may. And I would want to know, because if you did have a response, I think your risk assessment is a little different. And I would want to talk to my doctor about that. If your immune system fails to respond to the vaccine, I think you need to assume it will not respond to a live virus and adapt your behavior accordingly. From my perspective, what this means is I need to figure out a way to live with a virus that is as prevalent as the common cold, perhaps as contagious as measles, but more virulent than Ebola. And that poses a challenge, to say the least. One option for me is to live in isolation for the rest of my life. But for many people, most people, this really isn't feasible. And even in my case, though it's an option, it's not one I want to take. As I walk along this trail alone, I realize that the world is opening back up. People have ditched their masks. They're going back into the office. Businesses that shut down are starting back up. And it feels a bit like a ship that has been stuck in the harbor for 2 years has finally set sail. And I'm left behind on the dock, waving goodbye. And that's depressing, frankly. I want to find a lifeboat I can use to tag along. So I guess you can think of that as a metaphor for this channel. I have some ideas about how to do that I'd like to share with you. So stay tuned. Next time I want to talk about masks.